It's a community of entrepreneurs, of leaders, creating organizations to be forces for good. We provide a place, a people, and a process to help you become a better leader and create more meaningful work. And in rhythms such as these, and also just being a part of the community. And so, Jeff, how are you doing today? Got a great background back there.
Thank you. I staged with 2 fiddle leaves. I was going for a little Zach Galifianakis between 2 ferns, but between 2 fiddle leaves. So, you know, just trying to make it look pretty for everybody.
I appreciate it. That definitely comes through.
And thanks everybody for jumping in, including my mom. I just need to make a shout out to my mom. Jumped in on the call here today. So
you have to.
And my dad there too. Looks like my dad's in the background.
Yeah, you have to do the shout out. The number one. So if you're already learning things already, make sure to shout out your family members for being supportive. But Jeff, just want to dive into this conversation, and the way that we're approaching this is really, I think a lot of people are asking, you know, it feels like change is happening around us, maybe to us, and what change should we enact, you know, in terms of thinking specifically around business models. Some of the playbooks that some of our industries have been, you know, operating by are kind of out the window. And maybe even from like a personal perspective, how have you been observing the changing landscape, some of the shifts, and how to think about business modeling, even in general, but then also in light of the season we find ourselves in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll try to relay a little bit of our own journey as we've have navigated through this ourselves. I think, you know, we talk a lot at FieldWRK and in the Common Good Network about the need to know ourselves in order to lead ourselves, in order to lead others into meaningful work. And so if we're knowing ourselves to lead others into meaningful work, we can only begin to pivot our business models once we have actually done that good internal work of knowing how we're actually responding in difficult times like these. And so as I've been processing through this, what I've realized is, and even just, you know, coaching others, for the first 2 weeks, it was incredibly difficult to be present with other people in their realities, because I was going through my own internal sense making, my own internal struggles, my own navigation of the realities of what was being kind of forced upon us in what I would say is an unprecedented crisis in our time. And so I've been realizing in conversations that I actually had to go through a really significant grieving process. I found myself having coaching conversations where I was leading others through the stages of grief. And I had to go back and actually kind of look at stages of grief and realize, oh, actually they're going through these stages right now. And you're going through like anger, and I was seeing that in people and in myself at the same time. I was seeing moving through, and there's a really important concept in the last couple of years of my life that's been vital as I've recognized my own struggles even in walking through grief, because my tendency, like many of yours, might be to not want to accept, to just kind of gloss over. And as a creative pioneer, I'm thinking far into the future. And so my tendency is like, oh, let's figure out how to go about shifting the business model really quickly. But if I'm not emotionally present as a leader, if I haven't actually emotionally gone through the necessary stages of grieving, I'm not going to be able to actually build an organization and be present. And the concept of lamenting, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that, but I've heard about this idea of lamenting kind of from a biblical perspective. I saw throughout Bibles in scriptures, the people of God lamented, and I come from a Christian faith perspective, and I never really kind of internalized that and understood that until probably this last year when I heard somebody talk about lament as protest. That was key for me, because it's making sense of the reality that is. It's not just trying to gloss it over or kind of release it or say, well, everything's going to be okay. No, we actually can rise up and we can protest that this is happening to us as a mechanism for working through grief And in that protest, it actually releases us to be able to be creative on the other side of it. It actually helps us to finalize that grieving process and get through, in order to be able to then think, oh, I can actually be creative. And I found myself being able to do that with coaching clients and to help them release by calling it out and just like saying, hey, it sounds like you're angry right now. Maybe you need to protest that this is happening. And then I was able to do it right after and sit in a room and yell, or just like talk it through and say, I'm angry at this. I'm protesting that this is happening. This doesn't feel right or fair, the way that people are reacting to it, the situation as a whole. But immediately on the other side of that, I found myself more able to engage in ideas, more able to engage in creativity. So that was a key exercise for me in knowing myself and then leading myself, that started to give me the ability to then get into moving into leading others and pivoting a business model as we kind of navigate this journey together. So I just thought I'd start there because that's been so formative. And I would say you can't even start to think about pivoting a business model until you've done the good internal work of knowing yourself and leading yourself into being able to free yourself up.
Yeah, that's really good, because I feel like you can just carry that unresolved or unprocessed fear and anger and make decisions from that place instead of from this place of real creative agency, and really wanting to get to that place where we all want to be, which is creating, goods and services that are serving humanity, creating a culture for the common good, and what we're all kind of showing up to this game even trying to do in the first place. We can carry that with us if it's not tended to in the way that you're talking about it. That's really good. And I wonder, even just on that, as you were in that moment, lamenting and grieving and releasing, maybe letting go of some of the things that you were in process of building, right? A lot of us were in stride, fully headed towards the goals that we were after. And then all of a sudden it was a hard stop or a quick change. How do you, or how have you, even in this time, gone about sifting through what needs to be released and let go of, and what needs to be kind of hold on to as like that core part of what we're doing, and what we're really about that can't necessarily be thrown out? How do you discern that? And then what do you do, even maybe what tools do you use to help you process through what should be released, surrendered, let go of, and even lamented, and then what should be held on to and like kind of even more so doubling down on in terms of like who we are and what we're building?
Okay, so in our work at FieldWRK and in Common Good Network, we have a number of tools that we use. One of those we call our adaptive strategic planning process, which we enter into every 90 days, because we believe that there's no way you can write a business plan for 3 to 5 years and have it be solid for that amount of time. In fact, there's no way that you can write one for 1 year and have it be solid for that amount of time. And so we actually go through a process that allows us to be adaptive. Adaptive leadership has been something that we've been talking a lot about and really been trying to dive into and embody. And so that's another example of us trying to be adaptive leaders, be responsive, be constantly scanning the environment for what's new, what's being impressed upon us, small or big in this case, and then also building that into the process of our organization. So we, every 90 days, actually go back to our adaptive strategic plan, and we review 3 key categories of our organization. We review our identity, we review our strategy, and we review our organization's design. So to answer your question, Jonathan, I'd say first, to start off with, the things that are probably not going to change in a crisis like this are the core of your identity. And we really talk about 3 kind of major statements that will be unlikely to change in this season. The first one is a dream. A dream is a long-term kind of 50-year vision for the future. We want to see the world look like this. We kind of built that. We use that language even because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used that language in his I Have a Dream statement. And there's power in that long-term vision for the future, even one that might not or probably won't be realized by us and be seen by us. When he gave that speech, I'm sure he realized there was no way that he was going to actually live to see the fruition of that, but he gave it nonetheless because he knew that it was going to have to, he was going to have to give that in order to spur others on into community so that they could go and pursue that good work that he was calling them to do and to go and realize that vision for the future. And so we have a dream in the Common Good Network and at Fieldwork that sounds something like this. It's a different iteration based on the brand, but it sounds like we have a dream that one day all cities will be full of organizations that are pursuing and creating the common good. And that's the most good for all people. That is, the vulnerable are flourishing in those cities. The marginalized are being taken care of. If we're doing our work, that dream 50 years from now will be more likely to be fulfilled. And we're not going to be the only ones that are able to do it. We're going to have to work with others. And so there's this collective orientation to that. So a dream statement, if you don't have one, can be amazingly grounding for you as an organization, for your identity as an organization. If you don't have that long-term dream, that vision that you're after, you're likely to be subject to situations like this and be saying, well, I don't really know who we want to be down the road, so it kind of doesn't matter what our mission is. It kind of doesn't matter what we're doing with our strategy, because we could do pretty much anything. So the dream is foundational, primarily because it's motivating, but it's also this picture, this vision of the future. From there, we move to a problem statement, and the problem and the dream are connected. So the problem statement is a description of, in our case, when I talk about the marginalized and the vulnerable of society, and having them be taken care of and having the common good realized, the problem is really one of individualism. That's the root, like, philosophical problem that we are attacking as an organization. And that takes form through fieldwork. I'll use that as an example, where we say, if individualism is the problem, at fieldwork, we say that working alone doesn't work. That if you're trying to toil in individual work, then you're actually doing it wrong, because we weren't created to work individually. We were created to work in community. We were actually created to create in community with other people for the common good of our cities. Like, we firmly believe that is true, but the problem is we actually live in a super consumeristic, materialistic, I mean, like the epitome of that in Orange County, for those of you that are in Orange County. And as a result, we're so co-opted by that in our mindset and in our way of living that we don't realize that we're actually operating to continue and perpetuate self-interest over the common good. And so we talk a lot, Jonathan and I kind of remind each other a lot. We say we need to be falling in love with this problem in order to be grounded and rooted in it. And that's not going to change for us. This crisis is not actually, in fact, it might be exacerbating individualism in a lot of cases. And then we also see some of these glimpses of these amazing communal efforts and creativity that are coming out of this. But it really spurs us on to be able to say, if this is our dream, that one day all cities will be full of organizations that are working for the common good. And the problem is individualism. We're going to go attacking that. We're going to be working toward ending individualism and bringing around more of a community common good orientation. Then we transition into our mission statement. And our mission statement is a more present-oriented, grounded reality. That mission statement is going to sound something like this for all of our brands. It's going to say, we exist to guide creators into advancing the common good or creating meaningful work in the world. And if we're doing that well, and we're really, let me say it this way, the how we're doing that doesn't change. How we're doing that changes. Why we're doing it, the mission, doesn't change. So what doesn't change, I would say, is our dream, the problem, and the mission. But in this time of crisis, what does change then is the strategy, how we're going about fulfilling that mission. And so in our model, we actually take the mission statement and then we translate that into what we're starting to call a mission goal. which is about a 1, maybe 2 year time framed goal that would give measurement to mission fulfillment. And so if, let's like take Jonathan, how are you guys articulating FieldWRK's mission right now?
Our mission is to
put you on the spot here.
Yeah, no, our mission is to guide leaders in creating meaningful work together. And that together piece kind of gets at what you're talking about, the collective impact kind of nature of our work.
Yep.
And so, yeah, the main categories of our mission is guiding leaders and then creating meaningful work together. Those are like the things that we're holding ourselves to.
And prior to the crisis, do you remember what the mission goal was?
Yeah, the goal was to get to 200 leaders, as evidenced by members operating out of our workspaces, attending our classes and workshops, or in our private offices that we have in our 2 workspace locations, and an NPS score of 70 or plus. That was kind of like an indicator that people would, an NPS meaning a net promoter score, so that our members would refer us to other people as a place and a people that helps them, reach their goals and create meaningful work together. So, yeah,
good.
That was BC, before Corona.
Yeah. So, as an example, the problem, dream, and mission of FieldWRK has not changed, but the mission goal now likely is changing. We're in the process of having conversations about what that new mission goal needs to be, and that mission goal is a bridge into strategy. So if your identity is solid, you're still the same person, you're still the same organization today that you were 6 weeks ago when this all started. Your mission goal is going to be that bridge into strategy. And then your strategy is going to start to articulate, okay, now how are we going to go about fulfilling that new mission goal in order to live fully into our identity? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think thinking about some of the, the leaders or the entrepreneurs or business leaders I've talked to, it feels like we're kind of being tossed and pulled so many different directions that it feels like everything's on the table and like what to throw out and what not to. And the way that you're presenting this, if you're really clear on this identity, then it's almost like you consult your identity for the how, like, well, what does or doesn't move us more into that, now that we're clear on the why and the who we're meant to be, then like you said, the options for the how kind of open up. And I'm curious, you mentioned the 1 year. Talk to us a little bit about timeframes. So you said, we're not going to create a business plan for like 3 to 5 years for a world that we don't know what that will exist like. Nobody could have predicted this 3 to 5 years ago or 3 to 5 months ago. Now, how do we think about timeframes and how we strategize for, you mentioned 1 year, or what other timeframes come to mind for that?
Yeah, it's good. So I'll kind of include another tool in that. If you could just raise your hand, if you're familiar with the business model canvas, BMC, business model canvas, is anybody familiar with that tool? Okay, strategizer.com. I would recommend going there. Strategizer, I think it's spelled with a Y instead of an I. And Jonathan's pulling it up right now. Thank you. So this is the business model canvas. And this is another tool that we use to help make sense of our existing strategy, but then also to envision future strategy, what we're trying to transform into becoming. And so I'll get a little bit more into this as we go through the session, but I would say that the way we think about timeframes would be, I would say that the longest time horizon, according to psychological research, there's a sports psychologist that I follow, and he says that the longest time horizon we can envision ourselves achieving a goal is 90 days. And he's worked with tons of Olympic athletes. I'm forgetting his name right now, sorry. But he's worked with tons of Olympic athletes, and he says the longest time horizon we can envision ourselves achieving goals within 90 days. And so his recommendation is you can't actually plan specifically in a way that will be motivating to you past a 90-day time horizon. So that's vital in thinking about timing for your planning horizon. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't think, 3 years out, a year out, but you just have to recognize two things about that. One, you're not going to probably be as motivated to achieve a 1-year goal because you're not going to be able to see yourself fulfilling that, and you're not going to get the immediate results that will motivate and allow you to continue to progress toward that goal. But two, your environment is going to wildly change. If anybody's familiar with the SWOT analysis, you have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So strengths and weaknesses are internal competencies or lack thereof, and opportunities and threats are external, things that are being impressed upon us. The coronavirus is the epitome of an external threat, right? It was impressed upon us. It was a relatively unpredicted phenomenon, but there are many of these that we can see throughout history that are constantly happening to us, micro and macro. And so we just have to recognize that the longer out the time horizon we plan for, the less precise we're going to be able to be with it. And so the way that we accommodate for that is by having a 1-year directional kind of mission goal that we're pursuing. So Jonathan mentioned for fieldwork, it was that we would have 200 members of fieldwork by the end of 2020. That's what we started the year with. That is what I would say is a directional mission goal. If we didn't get quite 200, if it was 190 or if it was 210, I don't much care as long as it's guiding us toward that goal and it's causing us to think within 90-day time horizon what behaviors we need to engage in, what activities we need to do, and what shorter term activity goals and results we're trying to achieve. And so I think from a 90-day time horizon, we should try to be as accurate as possible. And as we continue to kind of look at those next 90 days, the next 90 days, the next 90 days, that's when we're trying to plan, but we're saying, hey, it could look like this. So we're in Q2 of 2020 right now, and the world is wildly changing. It's really, really difficult to look out to Q3 and Q4 and start to say, well, we're pretty sure the world's going to look like this in Q3. We're pretty sure it's going to look like this in Q4. No idea. There are too many variables that are changing right now to accurately prognosticate. The more we go through Q2, the more likely we'll be able to have some confidence in the reality of Q3 and Q4, those variables and those underlying assumptions that we're operating under. Right now, it's really, really difficult. So I would say in times of crisis, the time horizon for effectively and accurately predicting the future significantly decreases. And so you're looking at these 90-day time horizons saying, like, what's the next step we can take right now? What are scenarios that could guide us into the future? And maybe I would suggest in this time, what we've started doing is looking at worst case scenarios. If this were to last for 12 to 18 months, for example, with fieldwork, if our events business never was allowed to come back because the government put a 50-person cap on all public gatherings, what would we have to do in that situation? We could have continued on normal, and we can always go back to that if we're wrong about a worst case scenario. But if we start to operate off of a 50-person public gathering cap, guarantee you for fieldwork, that's going to cause us to rethink some of what we're doing, because we run a lot of events out of our spaces, and that's a part of our culture creating work. So that's kind of real time, even how we're navigating time horizons and looking at operating in 90-day strategic planning rhythms, where we're updating for that next 90 days and then also the next 12 months beyond that. So we're always in a 12 to 15 month kind of adaptive strategic planning cycle.
Yeah, it's really helpful for me, even it alleviates some of the pressure, I think, to have answers for our stakeholders beyond that, but to be able to communicate, with as much clarity as we have like right now, and for the next 90 days. And like you said, based on the psychology of how we can imagine, you can tell me that the sky will be purple in 91 days, and it's just as likely as, reaching our sales goal. And so like thinking about it, like it just alleviates a lot of pressure and clarifies and hones in on how to even communicate that to stakeholders, but our teams, our partners, our donors, our investors, our customers, like this is what our work and world looks like in these next 90 days. And I think that is even alleviating enough to them, guiding and leading enough to them to feel like, okay, and we'll deal with the beyond that as it becomes more clear and we come out of the fog a little bit. I just want to remind everybody, if you have questions, throw it in the chat, and we'll have a time for answering questions at the end, and I'll just be facilitating them as they come through. So go ahead and pop it in the chat, and we'll get to that towards the end of our time. So Jeff, you mentioned this tool, this business model canvassing tool, both as a tool for kind of sense making and scenario planning. I'll put it back on the screen here. Why don't you walk us through it, and then kind of different ways we can use it, and especially now as we're trying to think about, should we make any changes? Where should we make it in our business model? And then what should those changes look like? So I'll go ahead and put it up if you want to walk us through that.
Yeah, I would, in looking at this tool, so I'll just do a really brief introduction, since it didn't look like there were many people that were familiar with it. So there are 9 building blocks in this tool, and they are representing key areas of your kind of the design of your organization. And if you look at it from right to left is probably the best way of looking at it. What we don't have on here that we usually do when we walk people through this and create is kind of the right-hand side of the business model canvas, kind of half of value propositions, revenue streams, customer segments, relationships, and channels. We would say that you are delivering value in that right-hand side of the canvas. So you have a specific customer segment, and kind of to go back to your identity, it's likely that your customer segment will not be changing during a crisis like this. For some people it will, but it's likely that your customer segment won't have to change, because they're still going to be, probably your problem statement is related to a specific customer, or a better way of saying that is like a specific group of people that have very similar, what I would primarily say is psychographic characteristics. So their needs, their attitudes, their behaviors, the problems or the pains that they're experiencing in the world, the possibility that they see for the world are probably very similar. There's a segment, they have characteristics that are similar together. So you're putting this group of people, it's not all whatever 8 billion people in the world, it's probably a very small subset of focused characteristics. And you're trying to say, okay, in light of the problem that they're experiencing in the world, what value can we bring to alleviate that pain or allow them to step into possibility? And so you're delivering value to those customers. You're in the middle of the canvas, you're saying, what is that value? What are we proposing the value would be to that customer? The alleviation of pain, or the experience of possibility and hope and vision for their futures. And then you're delivering that through a type of relationship that you have with them and channels. So relationships would be, if you look at that bubble, the customer relationships, that building block, that would be the type of relationship that you have. So it would be like, oh, we have a one-to-one, highly personal relationship. So think about coaching, individual coaching, or like therapy. That's like a highly personalized, deep, constant, consistent relationship versus a one-to-many relationship where you're putting a webinar online and 10,000 people log in. But like if I were doing that and I was never interacting with any of those customers, it would be not very personalized, not very customized, not very relationship oriented. So the type of relationship you have gives you the ability to deliver value to customer segments. It mediates or moderates that. Likewise, the channel does. If you're in person with somebody, if you're using Zoom, So actually this is a really pertinent one right now. Like most of society right now is being forced to change the channel by which they operate their business, by which they deliver value to their customers, or much of society is. And if they're not forced to change the channel, they're at least forced to change how they're interacting with their own employees to create value, which is on the other half of the canvas. Revenue streams, revenue is extracted from that value exchange. So as you deliver value to a customer segment, you're extracting value. So the point of the canvas is, if you start on that right-hand side, you can start to map your identity. Who are we serving? What problem are we solving? Into the value that you're delivering to them and the ways that you're delivering value to them. And in times of disruption like this, you're starting to notice that while the value proposition and the customer segment are probably going to remain fairly consistent, the type of relationship that you have and the channels that you're using and the revenue streams that are flowing out of that are highly likely to be disrupted and change. Likewise, on the left side of the canvas, where you're creating value, you are creating that through key partners or suppliers who are, and you're like transforming that through key activities, and you're using resources to create value. So you think about a basic example like a coffee shop. A coffee's taking raw beans from a supplier, from a farmer. The bean is the key resource. The activity is roasting those beans, putting them in through an espresso machine and creating a drink. And then the value is the caffeine, the energy, the feeling of motivation for the day, et cetera, that you're delivering to a customer segment. And there's a cost associated with actually creating that value. So that's an overview of the canvas, and also start at ways of thinking about how times of disruption can cause specific building blocks to need to be changed. And what this tool does is it helps to isolate those and make sense of them, so that there's not the abstraction of, oh, everything's changing all around me, I don't know what to do. You can actually say through these 9, oh, which of these 9 building blocks is actually changing? We intended to do this, and it looks like now our channel for delivery, which is very pertinent to fieldwork right now, the channel is changing. We can't meet in physical spaces right now. So we're on a webinar, on a Zoom, and that channel for delivery is a new way of us trying to live into our dream, problem, mission goal, to engage entrepreneurs in collectively working toward the common good in their cities.
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned using this as a sense-making tool, like you just talked about. Like, what is our value proposition based off of who we are, our deep why, our mission that's unchanging, and then our customer segments. Now, I feel like depending upon your wiring, you know, the sky is falling and we need to change everything, Chicken Little syndrome, or, and this is probably maybe a different way of coping with that same feeling, but there's the opportunity is endless. And there's like, you know, a market grab opportunity, or there's a new business line opportunity that we can, you know, implement. And again, it's probably another way of coping with changes, but that more positive, optimistic look. How would you recommend going about, like, you know, thinking about, you know, maybe there's a new customer segment and that has implications for the model, or that's emerging, or maybe there's a new, you know, a new revenue stream opportunity. How would you encourage using this in a more maybe disciplined process, but still creative in scenario planning and, you know, rolling out new product offerings or changing product offerings?
So the benefit of this tool is it can be, it's not a static kind of one-time use tool. So I love, you use the word scenario planning. That is exactly how I would use this. If you're not familiar with scenario planning, it's simply a practice of changing variables, taking that SWOT kind of analysis, looking at your internal strengths and your weaknesses, or I would say your identity, plus the resources you have, the leadership voices you have represented on our team, your collective wisdom and experience. and then looking at external opportunities and threats. So when a threat comes in, like the coronavirus that wildly disrupts society, like Jonathan, you mentioned, there are going to be some opportunities that are going to come out of that. And so I would start by thinking opportunities, threats. I would, and then I would go about thinking, okay, now what impact are those threats and the subsequent opportunities having on the assumptions that we've used in our current business model? And so I would look at, first of all, sense making. So putting down your existing business model into these 9 building blocks, or what your pre-existing, your pre-coronavirus business model into the 9 building blocks. Make sense of what was. And then I would suggest doing scenarios based on a number of different probably variables changing, or a number of different kind of named situations. So I would say, hey, we're going to do a business model canvas based on the assumption that we're going to get hit by a second wave because all the states are going to open up too quickly. That's going to coincide with the seasonal influenza. We're going to see another major kind of shelter in place order from the government. It's actually going to be a little bit more severe than this one. And this whole cycle is going to last for another 18 months until we actually get either a vaccine or herd immunity, based on the fact that millions of us have already had some form of the virus. Right. So that's painting a picture of a 12 to 18 month future that is pretty dire for most businesses, the economy in general, and humanity, because it's like, oh great, now we're isolated even more. We've got rampant anxiety and depression in our system. There's all this stuff that you could play out that are part of that. But if you're painting that picture of that, like what would maybe be the worst case scenario, then you can say, okay, now what impact is that going to have on our customer segments? And so if that scenario is named worst case scenario, or the world's going to hell scenario, and then you say, okay, now what are customers going to be feeling, thinking, what needs are they going to have, what attitudes or behaviors that they have, as their problem changing? So as a result, should our problem be articulated in a different way? Or is it that they're just going to be feeling that pain more overtly? They're going to be feeling it more poignantly than they were before. And based on that scenario, what changes might we consider making to the relationships types that we have with our customers and the channels that we're using in order to continue to address that problem and provide the value that is needed in society? And you could go about doing that in 7, 8, 10 different scenarios, not to overwhelm you, but just to go through the process and the practice of saying, like, these are very real possibilities, and we don't know which one of them is going to come true, but we've actually gone through a process of considering multiple scenarios. So as we know more, we can go and say, oh, it looks like this medium case scenario is actually the one we've already started to process through, and we've already started to make adjustments. And I would look for commonalities in scenarios and say, hey, it looks like regardless of the situation where we end up, we're going to need to change something about our channels. We're going to need to start pivoting right there. And I would suggest starting to pivot as quickly as possible. Not wait until everything is clear, not wait until all of the variables have become known, but look for those commonalities where you say, regardless of these scenarios, all 8 of them point to this different reality for the future. And so these are the things that we know and we can start moving into differently.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to say something to the customer pain point that you talked about. If this scenario comes into play, what impact does it have, pain and possibility, on our customers that we're serving? And you can extend that out to other stakeholders that you're serving, donors, investors, teammates, even the team you're leading. What impact does it have on them? And I'd encourage us to actually ask them. I just shot off a quick text to a group of emerging leaders leading in different sectors, and I said, hey, what's your biggest pain point as a leader right now? And what was fascinating was that a lot of it was, pain points that kind of stand regardless of the pandemic that we're in. It was like dealing with conflict, creating culture. How do I, motivate my team towards the same goal? I was like, okay, that was actually really encouraging. Not a lot needs to change about the value, but the channel and the relationship maybe is what changed. And so to actually ask, do some discovery with your customers that you're serving and saying, hey, what is it that you're facing? What is it that you really want? What is it that you really need? And kind of starting there. I also want to say that too, for, a lot of us as leaders tend to be futuristic in our thinking. So we think we have to kind of work backwards from the future possibility towards the present moment and think about what changes to make. But that might not be how some present oriented, more nurturing voices, more guardian type voices think about it. And so if it's helpful to get you to this way of thinking, start with the pain point, start with what are people experiencing now, and maybe work your way around the canvas from building a bridge from the present to those future scenarios in that same way. And before I get to the questions, so again, if you have questions, throw it into the chat and I'll walk through those questions in a second. My last question, Jeff, is kind of making that turn towards communicating business model changes. Let's say that we've consulted our identity and we're clear and confident on our dream, or the problem we're solving, our mission, and our our mission goal, the 90-day goals that we're going after. And maybe it has led us to some changes. We are changing some customer relationships or some channel, we're going digital, or we're whatever it may be. How do we communicate and this is a lot of pain points I feel like I'm hearing from, like an increase of noise from a lot of other brands, right? We're all getting emails from, I saw a meme the other day that was like, Toyota 3 months ago, buy a Toyota, and Toyota now, it's a really hard time, buy a Toyota. Everyone's trying to kind of be not, keep from being tone deaf, but also not be noise. And to our existing customers, how do we not maybe jar them too much with some of the pivots we could be changing? How do we communicate in a way that calls them to maybe some of the adjustments, but also keeps them from being too turbulent in their experience of our brand or our product?
Well, first of all, I'll say it's yet to be seen if we're doing that well. So I don't know about the credibility of my answer necessarily, because it's really hard. It's really hard to navigate, that the existing noise, trying not to be, too disruptive in times that are changing. But I would say that's the value and the importance of being grounded in your identity, because the biggest disruption to a customer is going to be one where you're saying, oh, we're not actually going to serve you anymore. We're actually going to get out of this business, and you're kind of left in the lurch. But if you're grounded in your identity and you're not subject to, oh, coronavirus is coming in and now FieldWRK is going to be oriented around this completely different mission and dream and problem, and as a result, a different customer segment, then that's going to be a bad situation. That's going to be a customer disrupting situation. But if you're true to your identity and you're really just trying to make business model changes, I think just bringing the customers into the process is the way that you make sure that is not as disruptive. So, I mean, even one of the benefits of this kind of a call or webinar is that you all are aware of some of the things that we're navigating, and we try to be really vulnerable and kind of in process with our customers, with our members, and just say like, hey, here's what we're doing. We're trying to communicate. I think we sent out an email this morning to members saying, hey, here's the latest update, and here are some things we know, and here's some things we don't know, and here are some ways that we're trying to change in order to continue to meet you where your needs are, continue to try to solve the problem or allow you to step into possibility. And we're going to be ramping up more of this kind of resourcing that we were already doing in our physical spaces, but now we're having to take it into a different channel and a different environment. So I guess kind of to generalize that question, Jonathan, is like, even as you're engaging in those changes internally, I would say it should be an inclusive conversation with your team, with your staff, with your employees. It shouldn't be isolated to your leadership alone. And then in the same way, you should be engaging in conversations with customers, clients, members, in order to really understand what their needs are, how their needs are changing, what pains they're experiencing, just like you did, Jonathan, kind of pinging that larger group in order to bring them into the process. Because bringing them into the process shows that you're humble, shows that you're vulnerable, shows that you are not just forcing stuff upon them, but you're also going to learn a ton by doing that. And I think that's really important, because you can't assume that you know what psychographic characteristics, what needs, attitudes, and behaviors your customers are actually experiencing in any given moment. You might assume they're one thing, and you might learn by actually having a conversation that there's something different.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jeff. To get some questions, the first one comes in from Bert Yale asking, where do we find good information about the economy? The media is so sensational. So point us in the direction of some good, unsensational information.
Oh man, I wish I knew. Yeah, that's interesting question. I would actually take it back to scenario planning in that case, and I would try to look at a range of scenarios in order to put boundaries on either side of that sensationalism. So if you're looking at one side of sensationalism being this extreme negative, everything's going away, we're going to be in this forever, and then this other side is like, actually the coronavirus isn't that big of a deal, and it's just like the flu, and we're going to be open up and business as normal. I would say those are probably like extreme sides. Just putting boundaries around that might actually allow you to have a playing field within which to do some scenario planning. That's what I would suggest as the best way, because I mean, other than looking at what might be more objective, maybe news outlets, or trying to find those, that would be my other suggestion, is like, where are you getting your information, and how are you are you listening to people that are highly incentivized and motivated by making a whole lot more money, or are you listening to people that are highly incentivized and motivated to bring truth, as much as possible, objective truth to the picture? That would be a way that I would look at evaluating.
Yeah.
Does that help, Bert?
I think to go along with that too, it's really important to think through, maybe if you can, again, the customer discovery, who are your customers listening to? If you're serving a customer segment that has a psychographic that leans towards one specific side of the sensational roller coaster, that's really important to know too. So just know, as additional information to know how to communicate and lead your customer segment. I have a question from Christian. He says, thanks for hosting this. And he's asking us specifically, are we considering adjusting our value proposition and business model to align more with an incubator rather than a co-working space? And he says it's a clear distinction between the two. And during this time, an incubator can be much more valuable to entrepreneurs and do-gooders. So this is something that, we've has been in our communication, has been our thinking. Why don't you use this as more of like a case study, maybe even to walk through how we've done that, or how we are doing that, or thinking about it in terms of answering Christian's question.
Yeah, that's
zooming it up to that business model level.
It's really interesting, because if you think about kind of how we've actually been pivoting fieldwork specifically for about the last year at this point. So about last year at this time, we started to look at the co-working environment, and we used to lead with co-working, even though our mission and vision has always been around really added value support and guidance for entrepreneurs. We started looking at co-working space. We started looking at WeWork and the large influx of commercial real estate players into the shared workspace, workplace as a service kind of business model, and started to say, oh man, that's not like, it's actually morphed into something that isn't true to what we entered 5-6 years ago into. We entered into where it was a lot more community oriented. I mean, we started even thinking about it in terms of like coffee shops. Coffee shops went through first, second, third. Now we're kind of in this fourth wave coffee shop movement. It's like there's this iteration, there's this industry upheaval and change where innovation happens, customer needs, customer desires change. We were looking at that and saying like, oh man, this co-working thing that we got into is actually not the same as it used to be. And the term is being redefined by players that we can't control. And so in the fall of last year, we started having these conversations about saying, hey, we need to start calling ourselves an incubator, get back to really naming our mission, our vision, our dream, the way that we had originally kind of crafted them, and saying we need to actually talk about it the way that is reality. And so we started calling FLDWRK a social good incubator for leaders and startups, and using that language internally to test it out. and then started to slowly adjust our program opportunities. So we started saying, hey, let's test out some added value classes and workshops in our physical spaces. We've always been doing, coaching and consulting in various iterations, but then we started, what if we just simplified and made this, for general membership, something that's added value for everybody that's, a member. Let's stop calling them co-working members and start calling everybody just a member of Fieldwork. And let's start repositioning our own language and our own thinking so that it's about an incubator first. So interestingly now, the coronavirus is actually accelerating that significantly for us. It's distracted us, honestly, for like 3 or 4 weeks, because we've been in, like many of you, in a situation where we're fighting for survival. Like we are highly built in our business model around a lease arbitrage model. We have significant leases on 2 buildings, and we don't have the ability to occupy those. And that is significantly hitting our business model and hurting us. But we've been able to ask the question, okay, what do we need to do to transform in the season as quickly as possible so that we have a chance of not only continuing to fulfill our dream and solve that problem in the world and fulfill our mission, but then also to gain the revenue stream necessary to have a viable business model on the other side. So we began adjusting. We've made some decisions really quickly in order to drastically decrease expenses. We started negotiating with landlords immediately after the shelter-in-place orders. We applied for all the government funding. Like, we did all the things as quickly as possible to accelerate this pivot. And then now we've got the structure in place where we're going to be continuing to inject more and more of this added value online resource to our members in order to fully live into this incubator model. So in some ways, if you're a really optimistic person, you could say that this was a gift to the pivot that was already underway for us. And we're hoping, and you can tell us if we're succeeding at that or not. I would love and welcome the feedback on that and other ways that we can continue to step into this and really provide the value and the resources that you all need.
Yeah, that is really helpful and a good case study even to think about, like, to just even summarize the path that we've talked about. Consulting your identity. What has your mission always been? And maybe you've never had language for it, but if you start to put language around it, let's say your dream for the future of the world, the problem that you're addressing, the immediate pain point that you're meeting for your customers, and then your mission. Why do you exist? And then related to that, what is the mission goal that you can look to for that year time frame? And then also that leading into strategy and using a tool like Business Model Canvas to make sense of what it is, what it has been, what your value proposition is, your customer segment, and then scenario plan for those future time frames and time horizons, where what if this were to happen, or what if we were to change this in the different channels and relationships, and how would it kind of affect the whole model? And then knowing that you have those options at play for when things become more clear, either internally or externally, those external threats, those internal maybe conversations of customer discovery with customers, as things become more clear, or as Peter Drucker says, as the facts become clear, the decision will emerge. And so the more you can do that sense making and visioning, and when the two meet, there should be a path that's clear. But then also, even just in terms of the Fieldwork case study, that it will start to have implications for how we talk about ourselves in your communications and marketing, how you talk to your stakeholders, but then also even things like price points. When we were in this conversation, one of the things was like, how does our price even undercut this? If we're talking about being an incubator, but then we have co-working packages, that doesn't make sense. And then we're undercutting our own efforts. And so what if we had one streamlined, no-brainer cost that really communicated that as a member, you get access to everything, because what we're about is your incubation as a leader and as a startup, not necessarily, the hours. We were commoditizing the wrong thing. And so really good example of a business model case study there. And thanks, Christian. And again, welcome your input and feedback in this customer discovery. But as we wrap up, I want to give Jeff a second to have any parting words of encouragement or last thoughts. But before I do, tomorrow for members, we have a group coaching session at 9:30. I encourage you, if there is a specific challenge or opportunity that kind of came to light in this conversation, and you want to have a guided process of exploring it to come out of it with some really clear, epiphanies and action items, then join us for that conversation tomorrow at 9:30. The link is in the weekly. It'll also be in Slack for our members there. And if you're not a member, then you can go ahead and reach out to us, and we can invite you in as a guest to experience that. And also next week at the same time, we'll have Ashley Sikorsky leading the Lunch and Learn. She is a certified emotional intelligence coach, and she's going to be talking about how to bring a human touch to this increasingly virtual digital world. So the rules of emotional intelligence and social intelligence are still at play. But again, like we've talked about, the channels have changed. And so she's going to walk us through how to use those strengths to continue to provide value to the people that we're serving. So Jeff, any parting words of encouragement or, well, don't give us discouragement, encouragement.
I will encourage you. Well, let me just start out by saying thanks for jumping on. I know I've felt with you this season is tremendously difficult. I talked earlier about lamenting and needing to go through that process. If you haven't done that, I highly encourage you to kind of go back and do that. Walk through, identify where you are in grief, lament, allow yourself individually as a leader to process through that in order to come to the other side and be able to see hope and be able to see creativity. There is creativity that is always, always, always found in constraint. That is a core principle that's fundamental to the way that the world works and to humanity. Embrace the constraints that you're feeling right now in order to be able to move into creativity. There is creativity, there is hope on the other side. The world, I believe, will never look the same as it has. And so the faster we can move through the process, the more we can embrace what's being impressed upon us, I think the better work we're going to be able to do, the more we're going to be able to actually really go and solve probably an exacerbated problem for that customer segment that you're really interested in serving. But also, if you don't have that problem, if you don't have that grounding identity of that dream and that problem, that is a key combination. I would recommend doing that work so that you can be motivated in this time. A lot of us are sitting at home or isolated in these places where we can kind of recede into ourselves. And I would just encourage you to start to try to get glimpses of what you can be doing to serve other people. And I think the best way to do that is to go back to that dream and that problem and remind yourself over and over, this is why I exist as a person, as a human. This is what I can bring to the world. This is the unique way through this organization that I've created or that I work in of solving this unique problem that exists. And I'm going to go after that in a selfless way, in a human way. I'm going to go after solving that problem. I'm going to actually fight for this dream to be realized. And I'm not going to let this thing in this situation get me down. And there's a process that we can help you with to go through that. But I would just encourage you all. You're doing good work. Keep it up. We need you. We need what you're doing. And if nobody's told you today, I'm going to tell you right now, good work today. You're doing it. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, again, good work today. Good way to show up, everyone. Thanks for participating. And if you need anything that, as things were spurred or things came to mind in this, we'd love to partner with you in bringing some of these things to life. So reach out to us. But on that note, good work today, everyone, and continue to do good work this week. So thanks, everyone, for joining.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.